This morning I want to raise three very difficult questions about higher education. They're so difficult that I think we try to avoid confronting them, and I think you'll see why. When we begin to try to answer them these days, they have quite unhappy implications. But I'm going to try to make the case that there are reasons why we need to consider these questions. Now, I'm not so foolish that I'm going to answer them myself, although I'm going to suggest some possible answers that are based on my actual genuine beliefs. And as some of you know, I'm notorious for saying things you're not supposed to say. So I have tried to devise answers that will annoy everybody in the audience and probably offend a few. But you may not be equally annoyed, but you will be annoyed. The first question is, what is a college education? We use that expression as if that were a well-defined, clearly identifiable phenomena. And there probably was a time when it was, but I think we've moved beyond that time. The second question is, what percentage of an age cohort is capable of a college education? Is it 10%, 50%, 100%? And no matter what the percentage is, the last question is, even if you're capable of it, does everyone need one? You know, we're now living in a very odd time where people are seriously asking, is a college education worth it? And I do want to address that question. Now, there was a time when we knew the answers to most of these questions. A college education was a 4-year experience. Courses were 3 credit hours. Students would have a major, maybe 2. The campus was a place of independent research among a community of scholars. Faculty governance generally conducted the business of the university. It was explicitly not vocational. The point was to introduce students to the extraordinary achievements of humanity in science, literature, art, music, and motivate students to continue exploring those things for a lifetime. I do think that that was a very resource-intensive model. You know, we usually thought about private universities that had very huge financial resources, mostly in the Northeast, although a few in other regions of the country. The reality is it was so resource-intensive, it aimed at a very small percentage of an age group. In 1920, at the Yale commencement, the speaker pointed out that a college education was the province of about 2% of an age group. That changes dramatically, as you know, after World War II, with the GI Bill and also a period of sustained American prosperity and a period of expansive government for about 25 years. Public education boomed following that model. So by the 50s and certainly the 60s, about 50% of an age cohort would go to college and about 25% of them would graduate. And it was assumed anyone who could handle it would go to college because that was the path to upward mobility. Education and income are very highly correlated in American history, and people were motivated to use college as a way to move up. A college degree was a credential, but it was a credential that was actually tied to demonstrable skills. You got one first by doing a lot of reading. This is before the internet. And also by doing a lot of writing. You wrote a lot, and your papers were graded carefully and intensively by faculty. So we even did some math at that time. The reality is the credentials seemed to have some significance. It wasn't just a piece of paper. Okay, now much of that has changed, and I would argue the change has forced us to contemplate these questions, and there are 4 things that have changed, 4 reasons we have to think about it: political, economic, social, and cultural. The political reason is first and simplest to state: we're no longer in a period of prosperity and expansive government. The American economy clearly has weakened substantially, and we're in a period of government that is cutting back its support and services to the public. The reality is, as you all know, almost all states have dramatically cut their support for state universities year after year after year. Universities have tried to make up for that loss of revenue by jacking up tuition. So tuition has increased at multiple times the rate of inflation, and there's some thought that tuition is probably about as high as families can sustain. As a percentage of median family income, tuition is now much higher than it's ever been, even though median family income is actually down. More than that, students have been encouraged to take on extraordinary burdens of student debt, which we package as financial aid. Okay, so there are political reasons why we have to think about this. There are also some economic reasons that I want to point out. Okay, I'm about to show you a graph which I believe is the single most important graph I've ever seen in my life, and I think it's a graph every American should study. I should probably say that it is alleged that I sometimes wander the campus handing out this graph, and that is not completely false. Okay, what the graph shows are the changes in the number of jobs during the 11 recessions in our economy since World War II. Okay, the most recent recession is the red line, and you can see right away what almost all of us already know, that the loss of jobs was much, much larger than ever before since the Great Depression, and the recovery from that loss has been painfully slow and prolonged. Okay, the vertical axis is the percentage of jobs in America. The 0 point is the number of jobs we had when the economy peaked and went into recession. Okay, there's a much more striking thing to notice. The last 3 recessions are the red, brown, and black lines. The other 8 recessions, the prior recessions, clearly take the shape of a V. So when the economy bottomed out at what we call the trough, when the economy began to grow, almost immediately the number of jobs began to grow. Okay, if you look at the black line, which is the recession of 1990, that's no V. That's a U, kind of a squished out U. What that meant is when the economy began to grow, jobs were not added. In fact, people were still being laid off. We call this a jobless recovery, and it was quite new, certainly unprecedented since World War II. It took 12 months of growth before people began to add jobs. Okay, the next recession is the brown line, 2001, and you can see the same lack of a V. This is another U, even more squished out. A second consecutive jobless recovery. It took 18 months after the trough before the growth in jobs began. And of course, where we are now is the red line, and this is also very clearly not a V, but a really squished out U. It is now 4.5 years after the recession ended, and we are still back to the number, we are not back to the number of jobs we had when it began. More than that, as I'm sure most of you know, the jobs that are being created are not the jobs that were lost. Most of the jobs being created are low-skill, low-income service sector jobs. So there has been a structural change in the American economy, and one of the most significant characteristics of that change is the jobs market is much harsher. One way we can see this is leaving college is less a guarantee, graduating from college is less a guarantee of a good outcome. In 2012, 53% of recent college graduates were either unemployed or more commonly underemployed, doing things like wait service and retail jobs that they could have gotten without the degree. It is very clear now that the answer to the question, is a college education worth it, is it depends. Some degrees are worth more than others, some degrees are certainly worth it, and some probably not in this market. Okay, there are also some cultural reasons to think about this question. The reality is, I can't explain why, but I definitely know it is the case, college students over time in the United States now work much less on their studies. In a great report called Academically Adrift, by their own self-report, today's students study about half as much as students in the 1960s by their self-report. A better example is I began teaching 41 years ago, and in a lower division course at Boston College, in the first semester, I used 9 books, and nobody said a thing about it. That was a standard college course, and most of the students who got good grades read those books and demonstrated it. Over time, the potential for doing that has clearly declined. I can track my syllabi over time and see it. 9 books, 7 books, 5 books, 3 books. We're now at a point where many college courses are 1 textbook, and I go to lunch with some of my more disillusioned colleagues who are still trying hard, and they'll say, we can't get them to read the textbook. They'll write in their student evaluations, talk more about the book, which is read the book to us. Now, there are probably a lot of reasons for this. I mean, one is students have to work part-time jobs, often multiple part-time jobs, just to pay for this high tuition. But the amount of work students do is less than it used to be. For this reason, we have students when they graduate who are not necessarily as skilled as they should be. It's a notorious fact that we're graduating students who cannot write well. Employers complain about it, government complains about it, exams verify it. We're on a campus where we have a required freshman comp sequence, an aggressive expository writing program, 2 different writing centers, and several professional colleges, architecture, management, and engineering, that have added a writing course because employers complain their graduates cannot write well or clearly. Okay, part of the reason for this is students don't read as much. Reading and writing are 2 sides of the same coin. If you don't read, you won't be able to write as well. Another reason is grading papers is labor intensive and very few people like to do it. So we have them write few papers, and they're graded loosely or by underpaid TAs, or one of my favorites, kids who can't write grade each other. Okay, there's also a social reason. I'm talking about students if they were all one category, but of course there are many, many different types of students. Let me suggest a few important ones. There are highly motivated students. Those students are going to do fine. You know, they know what they want to do, they know what they have to do to get there, they work hard and they get there. And those students are terrific, but they're a minority. There are a great many students who are unmotivated, who arrive on the campus and think an easy A with little work is a good course. Okay, now that's a child's perspective, and we understand why a child would think that, but a course that's very little work and gives you an easy A is the worst possible preparation for this adult reality. The reality is we have students who really think college should still be kind of the prolonged adolescence of what we used to call MTV spring break, back when somebody probably watched MTV. Okay, because the jobs market is so tough, more and more people are buying into the notion that they should get more education. My own view is I suspect the correlation between education and income is weakening. But the reality is more and more people are trying to go to college, and we're encouraging that, and we're trying to encourage more and more of them to actually graduate. At the same time, we have shrinking resources. So we have more students with less money to educate them. In the best American way, we think about technology as a way to be more efficient. We have extraordinary technology, and it can probably help. The very best TED Talk I ever watched, actually the only one, was Salman Khan at 2011. This is the guy who founded Khan Academy, and as you probably know, he has developed an extraordinary website for educational purposes. There are about 2,200 different courses you can take, ranging all the way from basic arithmetic to vector calculus. About 2 million people each month now sign on to Khan Academy. Every day between 100 and 200,000 people are studying online. That so inspired Sebastian Thrun, a computer science professor at Stanford and a vice president at Google, that he launched this phenomena of the massive open online course, the MOOC. His artificial intelligence course signed up 160,000 students. He founded Udacity. He was off and running. We were going to revolutionize education. As you probably know, Sebastian Thrun has since changed his view. 4 months ago, in what he calls a pivot and what his critics call recanting, he said it actually didn't work very well. It worked fairly well for some students, the motivated students. But the unmotivated students didn't finish. About 90% of the people who start a MOOC don't finish. We also have a category of students that I call unprepared, whether they're motivated or not. When they get to campus, they're just not ready, usually because they come from a mediocre or worse public school system, or they have no family structure that supports education. Unprepared students, even if they finished Throon's courses, failed. So MOOCs are not the solution except for highly motivated students. We have to find a way to motivate students, and I confess I'm not sure how we're going to do it, but if we don't do it, market realities will motivate them, usually after the fact and very harshly. Okay, here are my suggestions of things we have to do. I think we all have to work harder. Everybody in the nation must work harder. Students must work harder. They must read much more, and we must make sure that happens if we give them passing grades. They must write more papers, which means people are going to have to grade those papers carefully. And I admit that's painful work, and I am very terrible at it. Faculty are going to have to work harder. Faculty are probably going to have to redefine their workload so it's not half research and half teaching. They're going to probably have to teach undergraduates more. They're probably going to have to teach small groups of undergraduates so they develop the skills of talking face to face. Academic administrators should be in the classroom. All of them. They should all be teaching. Now, we're at a university where the president teaches each semester, so it's a fairly safe thing to say. But the reality is there are all kinds of vice presidents, deans, vice provosts. I believe every administrator should be in the classroom because that will remind them that the business of the university isn't business, it's education. I think most administrators should be academics. We may need a few people who are experts in financial administration. We may need a skilled attorney, be the general counsel, but most of the staff activities that are performed at a university should be performed by academics because, again, they will understand the mission of the place is education. They're in the trenches. That's just the reality. I go to so many meetings where higher education is described as an industry, and everybody talks about our business model and our revenue stream. I personally believe that is unbelievably wrong. Making education a business is going to work just about as well as having healthcare serve as a business. Okay, the reality is, I don't think we should have a business model. We should have a university model. Students aren't customers, they're students. Okay, I understand in our time it's not going to be popular to say everybody needs to work harder, so I want to acknowledge that that applies to all of us. You know, if you're an American national, we're descended from people who worked really hard. You know, the pioneers, the immigrants who settled the continent, the people who survived slavery, or the Native Americans who survived whatever that was. I mean, the reality is we're descended from people who worked hard. So if we're going to tell our students they must work harder, we should demonstrate it by working harder ourselves. So here's my proposal. Everybody in the room who's not an engineer or a scientist or math major, when you go home tonight, should register on Khan Academy and begin to study math, working your way up to calculus, or alternatively, learning how to write code so you can program. All the engineers, scientists, and math majors in the room, when you go home, you should read the Iliad. Alternatively, you could listen to Mozart. I guess people today who have to multitask could do both. Okay? What I'm going to do, quite literally, is I'm going to go home tonight and I'm going to grade papers.